Thank you. To Australians who are listening to this debate as they're driving somewhere perhaps, or as they're making the dinner, what we're debating is the Morrison government's proposal to change the laws which go to conditions in the workplace. Now, my background is that I'm a very proud member of a union, and I've spent my adult life representing people to try and get fair conditions in the workplace, but always endeavouring to be a moderate union official, try to get a win-win, try and ensure that people have agency over their work, that they're fairly remunerated, that they feel that their interests are aligned with those of their employer. And the creation of harmony in the workplace, to me, is something which should be taken very seriously. And a lot of people don't realise, but the federal government, in the laws it makes, can have a direct impact upon the wages and conditions which people receive, the productivity which companies enjoy, the fairness at work. And Australia's always had a very proud tradition of going a third way. We've eschewed the excesses of pure capitalism, and of course we turned our back on the excesses of extreme socialism and communism 100 years ago. And this third way of a safety net underpinning productivity, underpinning wages growth is what I think has kept a middle class intact in this country. At least it has for many decades. And I think if you look at the difference between the United States and Australia and the circumstances of people who go to work there, that you could work in the United States and still be under the poverty line as opposed to Australia, there's a lot to be said for sensible industrial relations reform. But having said that, I believe very much in a fair go for all. I think this legislation is absolutely not serious. When I say not serious, I think if it was to be passed, it would be very serious and would be of great harm to Australian workers and therefore the Australian economy and Australian enterprises. But I think this is a government who didn't think that they would get elected in May of 2019, because they certainly didn't offer anything in industrial relations policy. But now they feel that to keep the Conservative base happy, a bit of red meat, they've decided to take a tried and true uniter of many aspects of the current coalition, that is cutting people's wages and conditions, deregulating the workplace. But when I look at this legislation, and tonight my remarks will be in several parts, I cannot help but draw the conclusion, and I will endeavour to do so to people listening in the next 10 or 12 minutes, that this Prime Minister doesn't actually care. He's wasting the nation's time. That he'd be happy if he could get these laws through, and a lot of other people would be unhappy, the workers of Australia. But in fact, that they're not even serious about what they don't believe in trying to improve productivity in the Australian workplace. Now, we've gone through COVID. COVID's been a dreadful experience. It still is a dreadful experience. Obviously, the greatest suffering is, of course, the families of those who've passed. But many people have lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods. Small businesses, people in certain sectors of the economy, and of course workers have lost shifts and literally millions of hours of work. My view is that the Australian people want just life to go back to normal, such as it can be after COVID. And I think that there is a responsibility on all of us who are privileged to serve in the Parliament of Australia to help Australians get back to normal, whatever that will look like. This law actually flies in the face of that, and that's my first objection. COVID's been a torrid time for millions of Australians and their families, so why on earth is the government delaying our return to normal by trying it on with a wage-cutting agenda, cutting people's wages? So I think this is exactly the wrong time. Even if you believed in the coalition's leave it to the marketplace and weaken the safety net of minimum conditions in Australia, even if you believed all of that, which I surely don't, surely COVID-19 and the terrible experience that is, and the battering that sectors are taking like tourism and travel agents, live events, international education, this is exactly the wrong time. Even if you believe in our deregulating workplace relations, which this is a move towards greater deregulation, this is exactly the wrong time, even if you believe that should occur. But not only is it the wrong time, this legislation is bad for the people, and it's bad for the Australian economy, and it's bad for business. I'll go through some of the specifics of why this is very poor legislation in a moment, but it doesn't do anything to assist productivity, and it is on this basis that I would encourage the Senate and members of Parliament to vote this legislation down. It's not what we need in workplace relations, either now or in the future. It's bad for the people, it's bad for the economy, and it's bad for business. And I think that some of the specifics in the legislation are so poorly drafted that it beggars belief that this dog's breakfast would even be offered up in legislation. Now, I understand the Attorney-General has taken his metaphorical shears to parts of the bill since it was first raised, but the answer should still be no to this legislation. The bill is still ugly, it is still an eyesore, it still does nothing for Australian workplaces. I mean, the Attorney-General has endeavoured to give it a makeover, a short back and sides to this otherwise unloved legislation, but he hasn't done a very good job. He's done half a job. He was created the legislative equivalent of the mullet. Indeed, that's probably unfair on the mullet. It is something less than a mullet. It is a con, it is a try-on, it is a dare. It is half this and half that. It is a mismatch of the bill, and I'll go to those specific points in a moment. It is a thankless piece of legislation. It is thankless to the Australian people who've got us through COVID and just want to go back to normal. There was nothing flagged of this legislation at the last election, but it actually undermines, I believe, enterprise bargaining. This is the classic stereotype where the Liberals and some of their allies in business, and I don't believe all in business want this legislation, they declare to the workforces of Australia, this is enterprise bargaining. We're the enterprise and you're the bargain, they would say to the workers. That's why this legislation should be rejected. I mean, in particular, let's look at the job market for people under the age of 30. If you ask them, how does the job landscape look? They'll say it's pretty grim. If you ask them, are they getting the hours of work they want? Is it easy to find a job? They'll say it's pretty hard. They'll say, do you think you'll ever be able to afford to buy a house, have a family, settle down on the hours of work you're getting? And they'd say very unlikely. Do you feel that there is job security available for you? And they will say no, there is not. Then you could ask them, do you think that the labour market is too deregulated or not deregulated enough? And they will most resoundingly say too deregulated. I mean, this bill, even without its boot ban, it makes it easier for employers to casualise jobs that have otherwise been permanent. That's bad. Makes bargaining for better pay and conditions more difficult than it already is. That's not good. It will allow wage cuts. That's a poor idea. And it takes the rights off workers on big projects by effectively eliminating unions out of negotiating greenfield project arrangements. This might well be red meat for some who are critical of the government for lacking any agenda whatsoever. It might be an attempt by the Prime Minister, who's not very good at building, who's better at tearing things down than building things up. I mean, the electric car schmozzle that this government conducted before the election, and now they're going to have to crab walk back to supporting those cars. I mean, if you look at this government, they're not very good at building things up, and this is not a recipe to build up productivity or cooperation in the workplace. It is most certainly bad economics. You know, someone famously said, it's the economy, stupid. Well, I'd like to vary that and say, actually, it's the workers, stupid. What we need to do is make sure that workers are getting proper wage rises. Stagnant wages growth diminishes consumer confidence. Stagnant wages growth diminishes the ability of people in the working class to get into the middle class and the middle class to stay in the middle class. Stagnant wages growth damages business because the very customers that people need to be coming through their doors and shopping and spending money can't because they're simply not making enough to make ends meet. This bill does not represent the finest traditions of industrial relation reform in this country, which are achieved by consensus. This government has specifically turned its back on a consensus approach and instead is favouring one set of arguments put forward by some employers and their advocates over the interests of others, including the trade union movement and workers. I mean, this law is very poorly drafted. Not only was the boot test that the government proposed stupid, and they've dropped that, but the casuals measures that they're proposing to help casuals become permanent is an overworked solution to what is a very simple problem. You could always give the opportunity for casuals to become permanent in the National Employment Standard. I believe what's happened here is the government doesn't really understand workplace relations and probably an employer group, perhaps the AR group, has pushed them into an elaborate definition of turning casuals into permanents, and it's just going to create a schmozzle for employers. And I mean, the other thing here is specifically when the government wanted to amend specific awards for a specific time to allow for COVID measures, they did include the opportunity for arbitration. So it meant that what this now means under the law that they're proposing is that part-timers could be required to work extra hours, even though they might be permanently on 16 or 20 hours a week. Then, even though that's their contract, that could be amended without the agreement of the worker to work up to 38 hours with no penalty rates. And the weakness is there's no arbitration. The reality is that this government, when COVID first hit, argued that they wanted flexibility for employers to be able to amend awards, but the safeguard was that there could be arbitration if people didn't agree on the proposal by employers. Now, quite often people would come to agreement, but now they've got rid of the arbitration protection, which means that no chance for people to speak up if they disagree with what's proposed. And to show how this government doesn't understand the fire it's playing with, the arbitration protection, which was put in place initially when COVID started, was only used in 5% of the time. So in 95% of the time, people, unions, the employers could work it out, but in 5% of the time there were disputes notified which were arbitrated. But the government doesn't even like it when 5% of the time there could be notified disputes and there could be arbitration to check the balance of what might be seen to be an unreasonable proposal from an employer. And so they've decided that even at 5% dispute notification, that's too much, so they'll just get rid of it altogether. This is a government who's gone further than they need to. We understand the importance of helping businesses through COVID, and there are plenty of sensible ideas you could do to help businesses get through COVID. You could extend JobKeeper in the travel industry. You could extend JobKeeper in the live event industry. You could extend JobKeeper in businesses who are affected by the closure of international borders. Perhaps you could run a work value case in aged care. Perhaps you could tackle gender inequality in the wages system. Perhaps you could look at how you can get in TAFE and degree qualified award classifications, how we could then look at gender inequality in those areas. Perhaps we could do more for early year educators. Perhaps we could have expanded the national employment standards. Perhaps there could have been greenfields agreements for project life with unions, not without unions, encouraging employers to have wages race to the bottom. Perhaps they could have looked at exploitation in the horticulture industry, the treatment of international workers coming to Australia. Perhaps they could have looked at paid domestic violence leave. They could have looked at how we could have rehabilitated injured workers. As I said at the outset, there is a fertile and productive area of workplace relations which can increase productivity. But has the government looked at any of that? Not at all. It's just, in I think what is a fairly slipshod, fairly not really that interested approach, just picked up a few of the chocolates from the right-wing employer lobby, and it's just said this is what we're going to do legislatively. And how does that help people? It simply doesn't. But what we also need to conclude upon when we have a look at this is that this legislation, the real reason why it should be rejected is that the Prime Minister himself doesn't really believe in it. I'd make a sporting bet with any coalition member that by mid-March, if this has all got too hard, ScoMo's going to drop the reforms anyway. This is just a means for a coalition to paper over, to unite the coalition members in an attack on unions and an attack on wages and a war cry of deregulate the workplace even further, even though it's already far too deregulated as it is. There's nothing here for productivity. There's nothing here which guarantees wages improvements. It's a hodgepodge, it's a collection of mismatch of ideas, none of which are in the interests of working people. And I suspect deep down, the Prime Minister doesn't even care. Oh, he'd love to get it through, let me be clear about that. He'd love to cut the wages of people. But he's indeed wasting the time of this nation, and I suspect that by the time of the budget, he won't even be talking about workplace relations because he knows that the people of Australia aren't going to buy into an us versus them set of rhetoric from this government. He knows that having gone through COVID, people just want to return to normal. And anything which delays a return to normal will not be met with approval by the people of Australia. The Prime Minister assumes that he can talk about the incumbency benefit politically of being the incumbent leader during COVID, but at the end of the day, people will mark this government down if they persist in resisting people's return to normal. For people who've lost hours of work, for companies who've lost income, for businesses who've lost customers, for young people who can't get a job in the market, for older people who are being displaced by the dodgy labour market schemes of this government, they don't want this legislation. They don't want this legislation. I'm afraid that at the, practically the 2-year mark of this government, they've missed an opportunity to do something by consensus, and instead they've just resorted to their deregulatory, let the market rip approach to workplace relations. That's why this legislation should be rejected, because it neither is in the interests of Australians, it doesn't let us get back to normal, and it puts this nation back when we should be moving forward.